All right, welcome to the Crime Scene Investigation and Photography course. My name, I'm going to take a minute to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me or don't know me well. My name is John Hurd. I came to CCM about 6 years ago. Prior to that, I was a police officer in Chester Township for 25 years. Actually, 4 years in Chester Borough, 21 years in Chester Township. And during that time, I was a detective for 5 years. So I had come here to CCM, I had some background in teaching, and I was able to parlay that education and my teaching at the academy, and police academy, and that I was able to parlay that into an opportunity to teach the youths what they need to know about criminal justice. And since the topic of the conversation today is learning to life, we're going to get into that and explain to you how what we teach is very applicable to what we're doing in the field. I'd like to take a moment to turn it over so that Dr. Solomons can introduce himself as well.
Bill Solomons. I've been with CCM for a couple of years now. I'm the newest faculty member. My background professionally is almost 26 years in law enforcement. Most of my time, about 21 of my years, was with the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office. I retired as a detective sergeant there. And over the course of my career, I probably spent a total of probably 6 years, either in the major crimes unit or the crime scene unit. So we responded to all homicides, not many in Somerset County, but all homicides, all major crimes in Somerset County. So in my career, I've done a lot of crime scene work. I've done some teaching in the area of crime scene work. So this was kind of a natural progression to move up to this level here. So that's my background.
All right, when we start talking about learning to life, I know there's a myriad of disciplines here in the room, and when we talk about learning to life, everyone has something that they want to teach their students and have them bring out into the field. Some of it is more practical and very on track, such as math. 2 + 2 has to equal 4 no matter what.
Not always, it could be in a different basis.
Okay. So my first opportunity at a quote is wrong. Okay, so I learned something new. And I'm never afraid to learn something new every day. Thanks, Jeff. But health science, that's an evolving science. You learn things new every day. So in police work, we give a framework. And our framework is based on the fact that there are so many different ways to get a job in law enforcement. I'm going to take just a moment to tell you about it. People can get hired with no education whatsoever, which is kind of interesting, but having no education, they can go through a process known as civil service. Civil service is a test that's offered every 2 years. They come up with a list of people, and the departments that use civil service testing, they just look at the list and pick who they want. For every one person they are looking for, they can look at any in the top 3. So if they're looking for 10 people, it's from the first 30 on the list. So it behooves a student to be as high on the list as possible. I'm not saying that an associate's degree is not going to help them have the knowledge base that they need, but it's not a prerequisite. The second way is known as Chief's Test. Some towns, municipalities in Morris County use what's known as the Chief's Test. Oftentimes they'll have a physical exam where they weed out some of the physically unfit people, and then they turn around and they offer a test, much like an SAT. Then those who do well on the test go to the next session, which is probably a interview, and then eventually it'll culminate with the psychological exam, see who's there and who's their eligible candidate. And then the next way is just what's known as the interview process. Some towns don't use the expense of testing whatsoever. They don't use civil service, they don't use the Chief's Test. They'll just let you make an application. They'll interview you. If they like you, you move on to the next step. Culminates with a psychological test, and then they hire you. And then the last way is students are availing themselves of this opportunity. It's called alternate route. And the conventional route is a police department hires you and then they train you. The alternate route is you pay your own way through training, and then once you have your certificate that says, hey, I'm a police officer, now police departments can bid on you and they say, I am a trained officer, please hire me. All right? And those are basically the ways that someone can be a police officer. To get an opportunity to go alternate route, you need a minimum of 60 credits to even take the test. So for the most part, you need an associate's degree. For the interview process, most towns require at least an associate's degree. And for chief's test, you need normally an associate's degree. Some departments have bumped it up to a bachelor's degree. So we have a unique offering here in criminal justice because not all of our students are using this as a 2-year stepping stone to a 4-year degree. Some are just coming here, getting their credits and going. Some are coming, getting a few credits, going into the military because the military actually assists you and has you place higher on the civil service test if you have military experience as well. So that's where the learning to life comes in. We do a number of different courses, and one of the courses, it's going to prepare this uniqueness of the criminal justice system. Some of the myths and realities, which is very interesting, is that first day, and I imagine most of you do the same, you walk around the room and say, hello, I'm Professor Hurd. What's your name? What do you want to do with this degree? Where do you hope you're going to be in 5 years? And oftentimes we hear the big three is, I want to be a police officer, I want to be a detective, or I want to be a crime scene investigator.
Or a behavior analysis.
Or, yeah, FBI, behavior profiling. All right, so those are like the big 3-4 answers that we get from our students. Unfortunately, we never want to trash their dreams. But
we will occasionally.
We will occasionally, because we have to tell them the realities. And what they don't realize is they think they can go out and get a job as a detective, whereas that's not the case. Because anyone who knows anything about police work, the insides of police work, detective is a position that you were assigned to that usually doesn't come as assignment until you've been on the police department for 5 to 10 years. It's usually a coveted job. It's not a promotion, it is an assignment. The biggest difference is that you wear a gold badge instead of a silver badge. So now you're one of the gold badge crew. It usually comes with promotion or detective. The problem and the myth of crime scene investigator is that crime scene investigator predominantly is a scientist. The crime scene, there are 2 different people that work a crime scene. What we're going to do today is talk to you about the people who respond to the crime scene. They are normally police who are trained in coming to a crime scene, preserving the evidence, and going from there. Then once that evidence is collected, it's brought back and processed by the forensic analyst. That's done in a lab. They wear a white coat. We chain them to the desk so they cannot escape. They are not the people in the field. And the myth versus the reality is that TV portrays it as if the person is going to come out, put on their gun belt, come to the scene of the crime, process it, then collect all the evidence, run back to the lab, analyze it, figure out who done it, and then put their gun belt back on, run back out, and go arrest the guy. And believe it or not, they do that all in 60 minutes, which is great for TV. But it's not great for reality. And the problem is sometimes these students are a little bit influenced by what they see in entertainment. And entertainment, we've learned, is not reality. Right? So we've found over the time that there are connections to many other courses. And we'll get into some of those as we develop the crime scene. But we are talking about the connection today with photography. We're going to be talking about the connection with forensic science. And obviously crime processing is a lot about forensic science. But there's a lot of what we teach to our students coming in because we don't need a patrolman to come in and trample the scene and taint the evidence before the detective gets in to actually collect the evidence to go for processing. Pretty good?
Yeah.
All right.
So first, the reason for signing in, the importance of that is there was no obviously no requirement to do so. It was to demonstrate the first rule of crime scene investigation is that it's a crime scene, and what's here is pristine until somebody enters it. What you kind of have to remember, and this is one of the first criminologists, scientific criminologists, was a guy by the name of Evan Locard, and Locard came up with this exchange principle. which said that it's impossible to come into contact within any environment without changing it in some small way, either by adding to it or taking something away. So by entering here, we had a pristine crime scene. We had everything that could have been there at the time the incident happened. Just by walking in, you've changed it, right? Your hairs are falling out all the time. For some of you, falling out a little more rapidly. I wasn't looking at yes. So at least I've gotten it before. You've changed. You've touched things, right? We'll talk about fingerprints. So the idea is you have to control the crime scene as best you can. You can never. Crime scenes don't happen in a vacuum. You can't hermetically seal it and say, okay, we know exactly what's there was there at the time it happened. So we have to control who comes in. And the main reason why that crime scene log is important is not necessarily to stop someone from coming in, per se. I think that those of us in law enforcement would say the crime scene log's main role is to keep people out that shouldn't be in there. Because once a town gets a major crime, like a homicide, they don't see those very often. And the old rubbernecking thing, everybody wants to come and see it. Like Philadelphia with the Metro, they're telling people to stay away. Everybody wants to look. So just because they're police chiefs or lieutenants or captains doesn't mean they want to come look too. Because they want to have a story to tell over a beer the next time they're out with somebody. So by putting your name on this sheet, you're saying to, and the officer hopefully is making this clear, this is part of the file, the case file. This is part of what the defense gets when there's a prosecution. So when the prosecution says, hey, I want to see who's at the crime scene, because that's what they're going to go after. Ever since O.J. Simpson, those of you old enough to remember O.J. Simpson, this is where forensic science changed, dramatically. Every defense attorney became an expert in forensic science, even though they had no idea what they were talking about. No idea, because they all watched a trial and they said, oh, that's a great thing, I'll start using that in my trials. But it was several years before they actually got sort of in tune to how to use it in their defenses. What the crime scene log does is says to people, hey, now you're part of this file. Now you're subject to subpoena. You threaten somebody to subpoena to come to trial because your name's on a report someplace. Most people are going to step back and say, yeah, I think I don't need to be in there. They don't want to get in that trick bag. So it controls the people that come in, it logs the people that come in, and it also provides a defense with the names of the people that were there. And for the most part, that stops people from coming in. I mean, as a sergeant, as a detective, as a patrol officer, if your chief says, I'm coming in, they're coming in, right? It's out of your hands, there's nothing you can do about it. But this at least helps prevent some of the other people from entering the crime scene. Once you see this, once the scene is here, then it's time to start thinking about processing it. And when we talk about the multidisciplinary approach, I think probably any department here, you could raise an issue and I could say, well, there's a connection to the crime scene. I mean, obviously sociology and history, and psychology, and all of these areas. Nursing, I mean, we talked about lividity and rigor mortis and body temperature. I mean, all these things are connected to the crime scene. So we try and bring it as much as we can from an interdisciplinary approach to say, hey, there's connections to everything. It's not, this doesn't just happen. I mean, there's things you have to understand. You don't have to be a scientist to do it because you're not working in a lab. But there are some things you should know. You should know what a scientist has got to do and how they're going to process the evidence. So if you don't know the processes, you're not going to be able to process the crime scene properly. You have to know what the lab is capable of doing. You can't take this knife to the lab and have them look at it under a microscope and just have a picture of the suspect come up in your view. I mean, that's just impossible. DNA is another one that's, there's a lot of misinformation about it.
What constitutes a crime scene? So, I mean, this is pretty obvious. The guy's got a knife in his
Well, this
chest,
would,
but,
well, I mean, yeah. I mean, if it was in his back and it was impossible for him to do it himself.
but who determines that there's been foul play?
Well, it depends. Initially, this is going to be a death investigation.
Okay.
Because I'm sure John has seen it, I'm sure Nick has seen it. I've seen horrific scenes of blood and knives. I had a woman once in Montgomery who killed herself, but we walked in and she had a knife sticking out of her throat, like this giant knife. I'm like, oh my God, this has got to be a homicide. She's got stab wounds all over her chest, and she's covered up in her blanket, and this giant knife sticking out. So you're like, well, it's got to be, but there's the locked door. So it's a death investigation until you determine that there's something leads you down the road of a homicide. That's really what it is first. You don't want to get too label it too quickly, you're just investigating the scene of death. Because if you start labeling too quickly, then you get sort of this problem Somerset's having with the Sheridans, if you're following that story about the homicide, suicide homicide of John Sheridan's wife. So you have to be very careful with how you label it. So you process it, and you try to stay as neutral as possible. And that's another thing that's very difficult for students to understand, that you pull a paycheck from a government, a municipality, a state, a county, but yet your job is to be neutral and not focused. And one thing I tell my students, which is just critically important, is I've stood in a bunch of crime scenes, and Nick and John done the same thing. And if I come into this crime scene, what human nature, what do you automatically do?
Well, you see if he's okay.
Well, yeah, we established, yeah, okay, you all right? Yeah, he's okay, he's dead. So what do? You speculate, right?
Yeah.
You speculate.
What happened here?
Right, you try this whole TV thing like John's talking about, okay, so here's what happened. And then you know what happens? 99 times out of 100, you're 100% wrong. You're always, I don't think I've ever speculated or heard speculation in a crime scene where the detective's like, oh, this is how it happened. You're like, wow, you're right about that. I've never had that conversation with somebody. So you try and be neutral, because the problem is if you get too locked in on something, you miss other things. Things that may be important. Because at a crime scene, as a crime scene investigator, you kind of are in a vacuum. You're at the scene, not for an hour. For some crime scenes, you could be there 12, 14 hours because it's such a methodical process. So you may not know what's going on with the rest of the investigation. So you have to sort of look at it in a very neutral way and collect everything, right? And process it as if you know nothing about what happened, and work from that direction. So the first thing that we try and teach our students in this course is not only the connections to other disciplines, but also how are you going to process this scene in a way that's going to be the most effective. And this scene is going to disappear, right? In an hour, this whole room is going to be back the way it was, just like a crime scene might be. You call a crime scene cleanup, they got a special thing for the blood, and they can fill the bullet holes, patchwork, whatever they got to do, and then everything's back to normal. That scene is gone. It existed for a period of time. You have one chance to memorialize that crime scene, and then it's done. The only chance is to recreate it in a courtroom, which is really what crime scene investigation is about. It's collecting evidence, but it's also for that 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half down the road when you get in the court. So the first thing that you would do here, once you've established that your guy is dead, obviously the care of the injured is the most important thing. But once you've done that, then the most important thing is photography. That's the most important aspect, because and it's really not it's for the jurors. You have to think about when you're photographing a crime scene, you're not doing it for you or your kid. You were there, you saw it. You could go into court and testify as to what the body looked like, but the jurors need to see what the scene looked like. So the photography, and good photography, is critically important. Critically important. So that's your.
All right, what we talk about with photography and where this is going to lead us near the end of this information is we're going to talk about creating an interdisciplinary course with photography. But right now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about crime scene photography. First rule, have a camera with you. That's the first rule. Now everybody has a cell phone. Of course mine's over here, but everybody has a cell phone, so you have a camera. But it's not that easy. Luckily Chester Township was nice enough to let me use their departmental camera to show you how we document and take pictures of crime scenes. No, that's not it. No, this was it. This was it. With every 32-ounce jar of ragu you would get in your camera. You know what? This is a camera. This will work in a pinch. It's not the best camera. It's not the camera I would choose, but it's certainly one that will document. As Bill said, what we're doing is we're memorializing the picture, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And 6 months from now, I can't remember whether the wallet was here or there. I can write a report that said, as the body was lying, I saw the wallet near his calf on the left side of the body as it was facing up. That sounds very descriptive. But if I were to just take a quick picture and boom, I got it, now all of a sudden I can show a picture. If it's something where I have to show some detail, I might want to show it in an 8x10 or a 5x20 or make a poster size of it. One of the things they say is you don't want to sensationalize a crime scene. So a lot of times attorneys will be very cautious if a scene is exceptionally bloody they won't allow pictures of blood and gore, or if they do, they will make you print them and posterize them in black and white so it doesn't inflame the jury, because that's very common. What would happen is, if I were to photograph this crime scene, the first thing I would do, believe it or not, I would start out here. My first pictures would be outside. They wouldn't even be of the room. They would be of the street address, the DH-110. So I've documented that I'm in DH-110. Then I would probably get where Bill is. I would go as wide angle as possible. And if possible, I would get a shot of this corner. And if I have to take it in multiple shots, that's fine, I'll do it. I'll do what I need to do. But then I replicate that in all four. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, at its most general, this is what I'm taking pictures of. Now I finally get into the area where the crime scene is, and I want to take either singular or multiple pictures of the crime scene in its progression. Then as I get a little bit closer, I may want to document something, and I may want to document that knife. So I want to get down here and take the picture of the knife, or take the picture of the face, or the body is not laying on the ground, so obviously there's a little bit of lividity and rigor mortis, so I want to take pictures of that. Whatever the case is, I want to take the pictures of the evidence, and what Bill had indicated is it is pristine. Right now, all I'm doing is putting some footprints in it, but I'm not altering anything. I'm not touching anything, and that's the important component of crime scene photography, to not touch anything. Back in the good old days when we had film cameras, the problem was if your camera was set wrong, or if you didn't know how to use your camera, you're taking a bunch of pictures that get rolled on the little spool, and you have no idea how the pictures turned out until the time that you bring them to the crime lab to have them processed. In the digital age, it's much easier. But still, whether it's digital or whether it was film camera, they had a theory, one case, one roll, which meant that if it was a film, I put that canister in there and I start working until I'm done. It might be 2 rolls, 3 rolls, 4 rolls of film, but when I'm done, I pull those and send all 4 of those to the crime lab. I wouldn't mix cases, because this might be a homicide, and I only get halfway through there, or a third of the way through the last roll. If I left that in, number one, I didn't get it processed at the same time, and there's always a chance that something could have damaged it. But the second more important reason is, what if my next call in the day was a sexual assault, where I had to take pictures of someone who was sexually assaulted and then murdered? Well, now this person, this attorney wants these pictures. And I tell him, hey, we're only going to give you a picture up till number 12 on this roll of 36. We're not going to give you the rest of them, because that's a sexual assault. It has nothing to do with you. Well, in the theory of transparency, you have to be able to show that all those pictures were from a different case. So that means you're showing them to an attorney. And he's not entitled to those sexual assault murder cases. He's only entitled to the ones that he's entitled to. But his argument, if you don't give him picture 13 through 26, he's going to make the assumption that those were the ones that were going to exonerate his client. So therefore, that's why you withheld them. And I'm saying, no, but I'm a police officer. I would never do that. It's because it's a different case. It's a losing argument. So the idea, and now with the invention of digital, this is great. And also with digital, that's why you're not snapping pictures on your iPhone. Because if you try to add and say, that picture I took with my iPhone is evidentiary, you're going to have a problem, because you're going to have to download all your memory and all your pictures. And if you're not comfortable showing an attorney every picture that's on your phone, don't take any pictures with your phone. Right? It's just something that you don't do. They say a picture tells 1,000 words. Photos freeze moments in time. But photos, you have to be careful, because photos also offer a very distorted perception of your life. And you probably never thought of this. Go back to any one of your photo albums. Everybody is smiling. You're at Aunt Bessie's picnic. You're at the shore. You got your new car. You never turned to your husband or wife and said, I've never seen your face so red after an argument. I'd love to take a picture of that. That's not when you pull out the camera. The difference in perspective is that we're coming here to take pictures in a bad situation. Where you go through your photo albums, everybody's smiling. Not everyone's smiling in these. What we do is we're supposed to tell a logical story. If I just took one general picture of this room, I don't know what I'm supposed to be focusing on. But now that I've taken pictures with no markings, now I can come back and say, okay, these are the evidence. Let's see, it's like the little colored numbers, right? I gotta find number one. Okay, number one. We get number one, then we get number two, then we get number three. And each one is an individual item. And if you didn't notice this, what these have is these have little measurements on them.
Actually fold out too, you can make a right angle, John.
Excuse me?
That one, top of it folds out too, on the roller. See the hinge on it?
Oh, okay. Oh, so we can have right angle with measurements. And the advantage of that is that we can then replicate in a 1-by-1 reproduction. So if you have small trace evidence, you can make it exact. It's not an estimate. In the absence of, believe it or not, you have to be innovative. In the absence of a ruler, I've put a quarter next to a piece of evidence because we know how big a quarter is in diameter. So now all of a sudden when they're doing the 1-by-1, they can replicate it based on the size of the quarter. And ultimately, you have to start, you don't have to really know your camera totally inside and out. And it's funny because I teach a course on photography over at the Police Academy. And I'm starting to lose the ability to talk about this joke, this next joke, because they don't understand. I always say that you don't, I can tell by just coming to your house whether you know how to use your camera or not. Because if your VCR blinks 12, you probably don't know how to use your camera. And the students that are in the police academy are 22 years old going, what? What's a VCR? What do you mean the 12 blinks? It's like, psh, psh. Instructions are pretty easy on this. For best results, take pictures outdoor in bright light. You should be at least 4 feet from your subject. Wind the device, push the button. Simplest camera. My Nikon. Those are the instruction manuals for the Nikon. I guarantee it reads like a book because it is. It's not quite War and Peace. Most of the photography that we can do, or that we need to do, is basic. Some of it requires extra, and we didn't set anything up, but on a sunlit day, if something is in the shadows, you have to take the camera off of automatic, because it's going to process the white or the bright. It's not going to process the shadows, and the shadows become even darker if you don't set it on manual. So if you don't know how to use your camera, that's why it was a natural selection for us to try to do interdisciplinary, moving this into photography, because photography 115 will teach how to take a picture. I need to teach what do we need to take pictures of. All right, and we'll get to that a little bit later. I'm going to turn it back over to Bill for a little bit.
Okay, so the photography's done. We've done all the pictures. That's the first person in a crime scene. The next one in now, which is something that's new, relatively speaking, is video. So the video is another way of memorializing this crime scene. And you would do it pretty much the same way. You would start outside the hallway or on the road. You would slowly, the problem we have now is people move too fast with the video. We're in a video world. Everybody's like, you got to move slow, because otherwise the jury, they're going to be throwing up. That's always not good. So you want to move very slowly and very methodically with video. And that's another tool for the jury to actually see exactly what the scene looks like. One of the problems with video is most places have a policy that there's no sound. Now you just turn the mic off, you disconnect the mic completely, because nothing more embarrassing than taking a video And then you get up close, and you have somebody in the background saying, look at that asshole, you know? Oh my God, they blew his head's completely blown off. What time's the pizza getting here? I'm starving, right, cops. And you can't just go back later and say, oh, I'm just gonna cut the sound out, because that's kind of embarrassing. Because that brings up the same point to John, that well, maybe somebody said something about another suspect, and that's why you cut it off, right? So something that would help my client, you cut off. So you can't, as embarrassing as it is, so most departments say, you don't need a narrative. You know, the person who took the video can come into court, show the video, and say, okay, now we're entering this room. This is the bedroom, the first bedroom on the left. This is the second bedroom. This is the master bedroom. This is the master bath. You know, you can narrate it as it's going along without having the sound, you know, the background noise of other people. So the video's done. Now it's time to start thinking about processing the scene. Now, the way this is set up, and this is the course that we teach this in, is investigative function, which is 215. Which is, hopefully most of the students have had the lower level CJ courses, they've had some of their psychology or sociology, maybe the criminology, which just talks about why people commit crime. And what we do in this course is, and something I've learned over my career, and I taught at the police academy for many years, I was assigned to the police academy, I've learned that practical application is the best way people learn. So some disciplines lend themselves to practical application better than others, I understand that, but for me, anytime I can get them hands-on, I know that learning is going to be increased. So what we do in investigative function is, from the beginning, they're building a crime. They're writing reports, and some of my last finals, my final is a crime scene, just like this one. And basically, what the students do is, over the course of the semester, they're writing reports. So in English, right? Probably one of the biggest problems in police work is report writing. It's awful. I mean, for the most part, it's awful. And unfortunately, when you hear good things about police officers or bad things, it has to do with how they write the reports. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. And from what I've learned, all you really need to know to write a good police report, you learned in 8th grade. By the curriculum, by 8th grade, you should learn everything you need to know. There's no science to it. It's very simple. It's a narrative report. You're telling a story. So we get them writing right away. So they're writing about a burglary that leads to a pawn shop, that leads to the son of the burglary victim, that leads to a friend of the son, that leads to Miranda, that leads to a prisoner search. All these reports are in this case file, and the very last thing they do for their final is a crime scene very similar to this, where they show up in a group of 5 or 6, they're on their own, they have an hour and 15 minutes to process the scene, to collect evidence, to do their sketch, to do everything. And that's kind of what you have there, some of the better ones I've gotten. And English, there's going to be some problems there, obviously. So but the idea is they get an idea of what's involved in it. So as far as the evidence and the collection of evidence, the question before is, how do you know it's a homicide? Well, how do you know something's evidence? In reality. Is this evidence? Because I picked this up and put it in a bag, does that mean it's evidence? Not really. The court determines what's evidence. I could have this knife, this gun, I could collect this gun from the medical examiner, because it's attached to the body, anything attached to the body goes with the body to the medical examiner's office. And I could bring it to court, and the prosecution would say, we want to introduce this piece of evidence, and the court could, for whatever reason, say, no, it's not being admitted evidence. So really the court decides what's evidence. All you do is collect it, thinking it's relevant, and then go from there. And another myth versus the reality is John talked about TV. The collection of evidence, for the most part, when you see it on TV, what do they put the evidence in? A plastic bag, right? Why do they do that? That's completely opposite what you should do in a crime scene. Completely opposite. But they do it because why?
So we can see it.
So you can see it, right? It's
It's for the TV audience.
Yeah.
I found the gun, right? I mean, it doesn't play well on TV. But in reality, this is what you use. It's a paper bag. And the reason for that is that evidence could be moist. You have moisture on evidence, and this will, being a porous surface, will air dry, which is what you want evidence to do. If I put something that's wet into a plastic bag, it's going to stay wet, it's going to mildew, it's going to alter the evidence, especially if DNA is involved. So that's another one of the myths versus realities. You'll almost never see anyone collect evidence in a plastic bag. It's always going to be paper, even if it's wet. You could take it, put it in paper, then into plastic to transport it. But once it comes to to where it's going, it's going to be air dry. I mean, that's the most important thing. So determining what's evidence, and then the sketching. And sketching is it's funny, because last time I did this with students just in the last semester, I had a student who was a pretty good student. They were sketching for an hour and like, oh, this is boring, I could never do this. I'm like, well, good, then you can, maybe you find another major or some other area that you like, because an hour is, I mean, a minimum. I mean, this would probably take, I mean, by the time we walked into this now, we probably would be out here till tonight.
Yeah.
I mean, midnight. I mean, it just takes that long to do it. So some of the myths and realities for our students is I want to process crime scenes to see on TV. Well, it's not an hour. You're going to be there. It's tedious. Sometimes it's very hot. It's very cold. Sometimes it's outside. You have the elements. So, it's not for everybody. But this gives them a good idea of what to expect. So we would have them sketch this crime scene. You can see in the reports they did sketch the final crime scene. Generally speaking, how they would do it. And then it's a matter of evidence collection. And then it's a matter of picking these items up, giving them whatever identification you've assigned to them, and packaging them properly, and then transporting it to wherever it needs to go. And in this case, you have about, 20 pieces? About 20 pieces of evidence. That's low. I mean, if this was, I've had cases of over 100, 200, 300 pieces of evidence we've collected from houses, because you really don't know, right? You don't know at the time. You can't really go back and say, oh, we forgot something. We didn't know this was going to be important. So we go back and get it. That's pretty embarrassing. So the crime scene that the students do here involves a lot of different disciplines, a lot of patience, and it tries to create that hands-on practical that I think is so important in retention, right? And turning if they really are interested. They want to do crime scenes. Well, here it is. If you can't handle an hour doing this, then maybe another area is more appropriate for you.
Now, a local detective will ultimately be trained in some of this. But even though I was in the detective bureau and I was trained how to do this, I wasn't the one who did it for Chester Township. And now I would never just put it in my hand, but I would pick it up. I would try to pick it up like this. Now, chances are there are no fingerprints on this shell casing, but there could be. A lot of times, just the act of firing it could have heated it up enough to dry up the oils that were there, which is what fingerprints are. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pick up a couple of shells to pass them around, because I had just had the fun task of going to the shooting range the other day for Professor Anastasia. And what I did was I gave him, or he asked me to bring some bullets, shell casings, shell casings. And what these shell casings are going to do is you can look at them, determine whether they're from the same gun, whether they're from different guns, and also, just like a fingerprint is unique, so is the firing pin of the gun. So are the markings for the extractor. So firing a gun or firing multiple bullets through the same gun, you should be able to turn them, hold them next to each other, look at them. And I mean, I think the ones over here are different calibers, so obviously, it's pretty obvious it's 2 guns. And now, we know there's a gun on the scene. We're going to shoot this and we're going to get a shell casing from this gun to compare it to the ones, because were the shell casings in the crime scene, did they belong to this gun? Did he even shoot the gun? Well, we know there was at least a 40 caliber and a 9mm, and we only see the 9mm, so where's the 40 caliber? So now we know we have 2 people. So the question is, when you see multiple shots, was one person shooting 2 guns? Did this gun ever get shot? These are the questions that we come up with something as simple as bullets. Now, we're not really heavily involved in having a say in what goes on with forensic science. And that's great, because he's doing a wonderful job. Everything I hear from all my students, they really enjoy that class as they do many of the other classes in our curriculum. But ultimately, what happens is they will ask for that, the shell case, but also a gun fires a bullet, and I don't know if many of you know this or not, but it fires a bullet with a series of cuts in the barrel that are spiral. And what it does, it spirals the bullet much like a quarterback will throw a football. If you throw it without spiraling it, it just kind of lobs. If you put a spiral on it, it tracks. Same thing with a bullet. And those are unique to the gun. Because if I take a bullet out of my seat, and then I find the gun later on, and I check the gun ballistically, I can determine whether the bullet came out of the gun by the different lands and grooves that were there that spin the bullet. I'm able to determine whether it came from, and that's conclusive evidence. That's not speculation. That's not. That's very, very, very definitive evidence. And now that also says, you know, like I said, we had 2 guns. We only found 1, so we're looking for the second gun on the grassy knoll. Who is the second gun? Do you want to?
Well, just fingerprints really quick. Does everybody know what fingerprints are? We hear a lot about it. If you look at your fingers, any friction skin has these ridges. And the ridges have sweat pores on top of them. They're microscopic. And they secrete perspiration oils. So when you touch something, because they're on the pores are on the top of this friction skin, these ridges, you leave that liquid, that perspiration, oils, whatever, wherever you touch. And there's a few different types of fingerprints. I don't get into that too much. But the key is that, and we'll do some fingerprint stuff here, some kind of neat fingerprint stuff at the end. But the connection, again, we're talking about interdisciplinary, and this is our math connection. Why can we say that there's no 2 fingerprints alike?
Pictures are different.
Right. Well, the issue with why they're different is it's how they determine fingerprints is, if you look at it, it's kind of hard to see, but there are certain what they call points, and all they are basically are.
I have a picture coming up.
I'll show you a picture just real quick so you understand how they work. Is this friction skin has different what they call points. Can you get that light? Yeah, hit that. You know that'll probably do it. Yeah, hit that first, that front one. So just that if you can see it. Oh. Turn everything on.
No,
Oh, there it is.
Wait, that turned.
It's killing the air.
that's weird.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I don't think it's supposed to be that.
So if you look at this, if you look at your own, you're going to see like here, you see a ridge ending. You see a ridge ending here. A ridge just stops, just ends someplace. Sometimes ridges are together and they bifurcate into 2 ridges. Sometimes there's just a little dot, it's like a little island in the middle of nowhere. You can see a bifurcation kind of right here. You see a ridge ending here. So a fingerprint examiner, all they do is they go into their machine and they find all these little minutiae, these little points, and they get a certain number of them. And if you get a certain number and you have a suspect, and they look to say, they can say as an expert that that's the same person. Now we have an automated system now. It's called AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. It does automatic. In the past, you have to go through by hand all these fingerprint cards and look for one that matches, right? Now the computer that does it, that kicks out, will kick out 3 possible matches, right? So you say, well, why does it kick out 3? It's an interesting fact. So if Chester Township, Chester Borough submits something to the state police and says, here, this is our suspect in a homicide, can you run it through the system, see if this guy's been arrested? And by the way, teachers, cops are all in the system too, right? Anybody's fingerprint is
Real estate.
nurses in the system. So you're not going to get away with it if you're, in this field. So you submit it, and of course, I mean, the computers, they can tell you which one is the right one. It's a computer, but it kicks out 3. Any idea why it would kick out 3?
Certain percentage of the points match.
Well, it's saying that all 3. These are 3 possible matches.
It only takes a certain number of points.
Well, that's a good point, but it doesn't really. I mean, I've heard of, they say 10 to 12 are generally enough, but I've seen people with 5 or 6. The court has never said you need X number of matches to say this is definitely the person. It could be less depending on the experience of the examiner. The reason why there's 3 is because you have the right, constitutional right, to cross-examine witnesses, right? I can't rule the agency's computer into court if it kicks you out as a suspect if you're a lawyer to cross-examine this computer. So it kicks out 3, so it says, okay, fingerprint examiner, here's 3, you pick which one it is. So the fingerprint examiner says, oh, not that one, not that one. oh, here's our guy. So then that's the person that kicks it out. Now, going back to the math question, the reason why we can say definitively that that's a match is because, one, we've been doing fingerprints for a long time, since the early 19th century, late 19th century. And we've never found two people with the same. Right. Statistically, the probability, so what they're saying is the probability, I'm no math guy, so I'm a cop, the probability of finding two people that match exceeds the population of the Earth.
Exceeds what?
The population of the Earth. It's same with DNA. When you talk about DNA matches, the possibility of having a match is 1 in 10,000. 1 in 6 planet Earths. I mean, it could go as high as that. So it's a probability issue. They just never found two people that are the same. Will they? Who knows what could happen? The odds obviously say that it's not going to happen. But that's where fingerprints, and like John said, some of these things are going to be difficult to process. Shell casings, maybe, I've seen it. The problem is that you talk about moisture, and in an explosion of a round leaving a gun, there's heat generated. So it's not going to hold that heat as much. And then it depends on how many the oils, because the oils on top of the perspiration will slow the evaporation process down, right? So it won't be as quick. So that's what we look at here. We look at different things, and like the beer bottles, obviously, they're easy, and it's a non-porous surface. It'd be very easy to process these for fingerprints. But you can't send a shell case, just get fingerprints off of it, right? Because it's extremely difficult. Weapons are very difficult because the cleaning, the way that they're made, and the cleaning solutions that's used to clean them are kind of resistant to fingerprints. So weapons are very hard to fingerprint. That's why sometimes you say, well, I put fingerprints off the gun, and you don't get it. Well, it's difficult, very difficult to do.
I know identical twins have the same DNA. Did they have the same thing?
No.
They didn't.
No, they don't. Fingerprints are third or fourth month in the womb. They start to form. And ironically, people have tried to. There's a couple trades where you lose them. If you work brick, masons tend to get them. But the problem with it is we've had people historically that have tried to get rid of them. John Dillinger actually tried. John Dillinger, at the time he died, before he died, had a doctor slice off his fingerprints. But you have to go pretty deep because the mechanism that creates it is fairly low below the skin. So it's going to grow back the exact same, right? So even when Dillinger was killed outside the theater, Lady in Red, his fingerprints started to grow back exactly the same because the process, they'll go back the exact same, they'll have the exact same detail. So trying to get rid of them is very difficult to do. Almost impossible unless you're like a mason.
What about like burning them? Is that the same?
Yeah, burning, but then again, burning, if you had someone that only had certain fingers, then you might know that person, that might limit that person. Plus, if you look down your skin, it generally goes lower. So even below the finger pad, there's still detail there that you might be able to identify.
Another thing that's pretty interesting about fingerprints is if these are fingerprints, if you have a cut that goes right along here, it can now heal, and there's a definitive scar, and your fingerprints didn't line up the way they were in the beginning. And I don't have a fingerprint of one of mine, but on my thumb I have a scar where it shows that happens, where the fingerprint is off the lands and grooves. And when we're actually looking at fingerprints to type them, you see this area down here. This is called the delta. And what they do is they count the number of ridges to the center. And then they look at whether it's going towards the ulnar bone or whether it's not. So that's going to ultimately, because when it loops in, around, and goes back out, it could be an ulnar loop if it's heading towards the ulnar bone. And it's not a non-ulnar loop if it's not. There are whirls, there's swirls, there's non-typicals, there's so many different patterns that actually the examination of fingerprints is a science in and of itself. One of the things that was interesting, Bill brought up DNA, and the day before Halloween, traditionally, I don't know, some people have a propensity towards busting pumpkins. I don't know what that's all about. We've actually had people in Chester call us, bring us out there, and ask us to check for fingerprints on the pumpkin skins because they saw it on CSI the night before that you can get fingerprints off of almost everything. And not 100% true, but there again, TV's not always accurate. Before we get into anything else that we were going to do today, I'm going to just talk briefly about creating an interdisciplinary course. We saw photography, we saw it to be a perfect merge with criminal justice. And in working, and I know that's something that the college is very supportive of. The college is very supportive of two different disciplines working together and getting into a specific, a new course, if possible. I found difficulties with it, and I don't know how many are going to get ironed out, how many are not. I talked to Clay Allen, who's the head of that division right now, that department, and he had indicated to me that he right now has 2 Photo 115 classes. One of them is specifically tailored towards photo majors. One is tailored towards non-photo majors. Of course, the CJ students that are going to be taking Photo 115 for an investigative track, they're going to be taking the non-photo. The problem is, I probably have 4 or 5 days, maybe 6 days worth of information to come in and guest lecture in his department. I'm now hurting his syllabus because I'm asking him to take 3 weeks out of his syllabus. We don't have enough CJ students to have a dedicated class just for photography for the CJ student. So we're coming into a few minor roadblocks, and we're not sure. And to be honest with you, I wanted to bring that up, not because it's a success story, but because I'm finding difficulties in trying to accomplish what I was hoping was going to be an easy merge. We may have a way to fix it temporarily until we figure out whether we can actually do it in the photo department. Our way of fixing it is going to be doing it during the investigative function class or the evidence class, right? Evidence and procedure. We're going to be doing it during a CJ class. So now, if it's Bill's class, he'll come and lecture in my class, I'll go and lecture in his. And I'm assuming the students have already taken criminal justice, or they've already taken investigative function, they've already taken, or they're in a process for, but they've already taken photography. So now you know how to take a picture. Let me show you the pictures I want you to take. Or the nuances that I think you should be concerned about. Because like I said, we don't have smiles on our faces all the time. And I hate to say it, but the person lying on the floor never asks you to get their good side. Because when you're lying on the floor, there is no good side. So ultimately, that's the difficulties we're finding with an interdisciplinary as in its purest form. So we're probably going to be able to fix it. Don't know how yet. And I think that's...
Yeah, the only thing I would throw out there is that, you know, we just did a dramatic curriculum revision, and we added a bunch of electives to our curriculum. So, you know, now students have a lot more options, and I would say that if you have any ideas for interdisciplinary courses that can run as either CJ or your department or a combination for both, you know, let us know. Because, I mean, if you see it someplace where we could combine 2 programs, I would be all for it. Whether it's history or psychology or nursing or whatever. I mean, it's wide open, and I'm sure our students would love it. So if you see an area there, I'd be more than willing to sit down and talk about it. So just as sort of going away, there's around it. It's actually worked out better because not many people. So you have some paper. Make sure you have a piece of paper in front of you, just a blank piece of paper. You grab that jar and that brush there. You guys have one there. I'll give you.
You're not going to get it.
Yeah, you can use your own. This is enough. So I'm going to make this as non-messy as possible. And so you're gonna have something to take home with you. You can memorial. Yeah, you can take it up, put it on your fridge. We have gold stars. What you have here is a magnetic brush, a magnetic wand. The magnetic powder has magnetic filings in it, so it sticks. Right? So this is the kind of powder you would use on paper, on a porous object, like this paper you have there. Wood, it's unfinished wood would work on, and it's probably the neatest. So what you're going to do very simply is this. Let me come up here so you can see a little better. How this one works, very simple. There's a magnet that's inside of it. This top piece pulls the magnet up. So the magnet is usually here, but now it's up, so it's not going to pick up any of the powder. right? So once you drop this down, the magnet's in the bottom is going to pick up the filings. All you're going to do very simply is you're going to get a little bit of sweat on there. You're going to pick up a little bit of the magnetic filings and just lightly brush it over the top, and you're going to see your fingerprint's going to come up very nicely. Okay?
Oh, you have to
And then-
roll it?
No, I just did that.
So I'll put this one back, I'll put this one over here. Yeah, you do a whole, just brush it lightly over the top, and you'll. Oh, you got it. That'd be something, right? Shut out of school.
Over there.
That was your, that was mine.
Welcome to Newtown.